Oh, it's so lovely to see you. Pull up a chair, grab a spot on the couch by the fire, and as the rain comes down, let's enjoy some cozy horror. With me, Dr. Plague. I've got 5 great stories for you today, so I hope you're comfy, and I hope you'll stick around for the whole show. Let's get things started with a relatively unknown writer to this channel, but one who definitely has provided some great stories. Brought to us by Big Performance 9785, let's learn a little bit more about the mysteries of Floor 13. I worked the night shift as a security guard at a downtown office building. It's an old structure, built in the 70s. While it's nothing special, the building has its fair share of quirks. Flickering lights, creaking pipes, and an elevator that makes the most unsettling groaning sounds whenever it moves. Usually the shift is quiet. Just me, the cameras, and the dim hum of the overhead lights. But a few nights ago, something changed. Around 2 a.m., I noticed someone on the cameras. A figure, he or it, I suppose, was standing in the lobby, just out of reach of the light. Couldn't make out his face, but his clothes looked old, like they didn't belong in this decade. He stood there for a moment, motionless, before moving towards the elevator. His gait was stiff, almost unnatural. He pressed the button and waited, but the elevator didn't move. I kept watching, thinking maybe it was a homeless guy who'd wandered in, but after a few minutes, something strange happened. The lights flickered once, then just went out completely. The screen showed the lobby cameras turning black. My heart raced. I waited for the power to come back on, but it didn't. It was just silence. I decided to go check it out in person. Stupid, I know, but curiosity got the better of me. Grabbing my flashlight, I made my way down to the lobby. As I walked, I could feel the oppressive weight of the darkness as it pressed in on me. Everything felt wrong. When I reached the lobby, it was pitch black, except for the weak beam of my flashlight. I swept the light across the room. It was empty. No sign of the man. But the air felt thick, like something was there, hiding just out of sight. The only sound was the soft hum of the elevator. I pointed the light at the elevator doors. They were open. The elevator has never moved, not in all the time that I've been here. Yet now it was wide open, revealing an abyss of darkness inside. I stepped forward, my flashlight shaking in my hand. The darkness inside the elevator seemed to pulse, like it was alive, waiting for something, waiting for someone. My gut screamed at me to turn around, to run back to the security room, but I couldn't move. My feet felt like they were glued to the floor. Then I felt it. Something brushed against the back of my neck. It was light, almost like the softest whisper of a hand, but it was enough to send every nerve in my body into overdrive. I spun around, but there was nothing. Just empty air. Or so I thought. The flashlight flickered and I caught a glimpse, just a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. Something tall, too tall, was standing just behind me. I turned, heart pounding in my chest, but when I looked, the thing was gone. The lobby was empty. Except, I knew I wasn't alone. I could feel something watching from behind me, but every time I turned, there was nothing. No sound, no movement, just the suffocating weight of its presence. It was like the air was alive, pressing against me, whispering in a language I couldn't understand. The lights flickered again, and suddenly I was plunged into complete darkness. I heard the elevator doors creak as if they were slowly beginning to close. I took a step back, and that's when I felt it again. This time the touch wasn't soft. It was cold, firm, like a hand wrapping around my shoulder. I whipped around, expecting to see him, the man, the figure from the camera, but instead there was nothing. Only the endless black. I couldn't see. I couldn't breathe. My back pressed against the elevator doors as they started to close behind me. That's when I realized I was no longer just imagining the touch. The hand was still there, cold fingers digging into my skin. The whispering was louder now, right in my ear. A single, rasping breath that sent ice shooting through my spine. Before I could move, I felt something shift behind me, and the world tilted. The elevator moved. The doors, though closed, didn't feel like doors anymore. Felt like I was being pulled backwards into something. I stumbled forward, trying to escape whatever was behind me, but it was too late. I don't know how to explain what happened next. The walls stretched. They weren't walls anymore. The whole building felt like it was bending, twisting around me, pulling me towards the elevator. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. A cold, suffocating presence, dragging me closer and closer. The hand on my shoulder squeezed tighter, forcing me down to my knees. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The whispers were louder, coming from everywhere and nowhere all at once. I wanted to turn around to see whatever was behind me, but deep down I knew that if I did, it'd be the last thing I ever saw. Just as the pressure became unbearable, the lights flickered on, and everything stopped. The elevator was closed. The lobby was empty. I staggered back to the security room, my legs shaking. Pulled up the camera feed, hoping to make sense of what had happened. But the footage was gone. It was like nothing had happened at all. But every night since, I felt it. The thing in the elevator. It's waiting for me. It's always there, just out of sight, just out of reach. Every time the lights flicker, every time I pass the elevator, I can feel it watching. And I know one night when the lights go out, it's gonna pull me in. Not a particularly long story, but you know what they say. Sometimes the best things come in small packages. And a lot of our stories, some of them large and some of them small, definitely fall into the category of best things. Moving right along, we go from a potentially unknown writer to a very well-known writer on the channel, brought to us by our old friend, JGrupe. Let's think about how we would feel if we had an emergency alert on our phone in the middle of nowhere. The emergency alert on my phone went off with a shrill noise, repeating 3 times and vibrating angrily, just as I was bringing the last of my stuff into the cabin. I took the device out of my pocket and stared at it in disbelief for about a minute before realizing that I'd have to leave, only moments after arriving. My hands were shaking from the cold as I read through it again. Severe weather alert. Heavy snowfall in the Frontenac region is expected to begin tomorrow. 60 to 80 centimeters of precipitation. Not good. I realized the roads would be impassable by this time, the following day. That meant I would have to leave early the next morning to avoid being stuck on the road in the blizzard. but subsequently meant zero ice fishing time for me. I'd be lucky to make it home before it started coming down in earnest. Moments later, messages started coming in from my 3 friends who had planned to join me. The group chat notification popped up on my phone as I opened it. Matt, did you see the emergency alert about the storm? I guess the trip's off. What a bunch of crap. Ted, OMFG, a generational storm is what they're calling it now. Looks like we'll have to postpone it a few weeks. I hope you didn't go through with your plan to go up a day early, Jay. Greg, no kidding. What are the chances this blizzard hits on our ice fishing weekend? I messaged back saying I understood we'd have to reschedule. I told them that I made the trip up alone, accompanying the message with forehead slapping emojis. It sucks that I'll be stuck up here alone, I thought to myself. My dog Gibson pawed at my leg, and I smiled at her, feeling slightly reassured by her presence. Yeah, you're right, Gibby. I'm not completely alone. At least I've got you here with me. After putting down a bowl of water and another containing kibble, my next priority was to start a fire in the small brick stove at the center of the main living area. There was wood stacked up in a neat pile next to it, and a small bag containing kindling, which we'd brought with us in the summer and left behind. At first glance, it looked like a large enough stack, but I knew from experience I'd need twice as much as it appeared to make to get through the night, so I went outside to gather more from beneath the boathouse. The family cottage was a rustic one, to put it mildly. There's no running water, no electricity, and the cabin's poorly insulated. Perennially procrastinated repairs were needed in more than one place, including the floor beneath one bed, which had partially collapsed, letting in slight trickles of cold air from outside. It was drafty, and I could hear the sound of mice, which had made their way through the gaps, burrowing in the bedroom and finding their way into our old coats or sleeping bags or something that we'd left behind. I sighed as I lit the kerosene lamps, which were scattered on wobbly tables around the main living area. There was something about having vermin in the cottage that set me on edge, but at least Gibson's presence would keep them at a distance. After filling the place with warm, flickering light from a half-dozen kerosene lamps, I felt a little better. There was reassurance in having fire, and I started working on making a big one in the stove that would keep me warm throughout the night. I loosely wadded up some newspaper and then stacked dry kindling on top, making a teepee. Over that, I added larger pieces of wood, until I had piled it to the ceiling of the small stove. Then I lit a strip of cardboard and held it up to the paper inside, catching it alight in several places, watching as it began to burn and then flared up in a bright white-orange glow. Holding my hands up to the fire, I watched it and warmed myself up. Eventually I took off my boots and my coat, the entire cottage getting a little toasty. There's no sense unpacking, I thought, taking a beer out of the cooler and opening it. I took a sip and couldn't help but grimace at the taste. I'd never tried the brand before, and I'd picked it up on recommendation. It was awful, and lukewarm to boot. Par for the course, considering the trip so far. Took out my phone and watched some Netflix while beer went flat beside me. I lifted Gibson up onto the futon with me so that she was off the floor and close to the fire where it was warm. Eventually I got bored of office reruns and called it a night, adding another log to the fire and reminding myself to wake up in an hour to keep it going. Pulling the futon even closer to the stove so that it was close to the fire as safety would allow, I curled up in my sleeping bag and drifted off into an uncomfortable slumber, constantly tossing and turning, trying to stay warm, but not really succeeding. I woke up to the sound of whining coming from Gibson's trembling form on the bed beside me. I was so cold that I was actually scared. My teeth were chattering uncontrollably, and I realized a few hours had passed. The fire had gone out completely, reduced to mere embers at the base of the stove. I put on my jacket and blew hot breath onto my fingers, pulling Gibson closer to me. She was shaking as well. My hands were trembling as I put more newspaper and kindling on the fire, blowing it into embers and hoping they would reignite. My lungs felt frozen, and my heart was beating fast, my skin prickling with pins and needles, turning it into a total numbness in my extremities. I'd never felt so cold in my life. I realized I was far beyond the weather forecast for tomorrow. It seemed like it was minus 30 degrees. and steadily dropping further. Terrified that I wouldn't be able to get my body temperature back up, my mind started racing, thinking of worst-case scenarios. If I couldn't stop shaking pretty soon, it would be impossible to start the fire again. I recalled that my truck was just outside, and I could get in there and start it up, turning on the heat until I felt warm again. The idea of getting out there and the truck refusing to start was too much to take, though. Considering the state of the beat-up old Ford, that seemed like a distinct possibility. So I continued stoking the fire, blowing on the precious few embers and adding more newspaper every so often until the tiny flame had begun to grow. I held my shaking hands up to the measly fire and added pieces of kindling sparingly, one by one, terrified of it going out again. Pulling Gibson closer, we shared each other's warmth, and I began to feel halfway human again. A sound came from outside the cabin suddenly, startling me and causing me to jump. My heart skipped a beat, then pounded faster and faster in my chest. A noise like fingernails being dragged along the siding could be heard from all around. Echoing in the small space, something was going from one end of the cottage to the other, attempting to get inside. Deep, guttural breathing could be heard, grunting and snorting, desperate as it scraped its talons along the boarded-up windows. Gibson began to whine, making high-pitched noises as she huddled closer to me, and I put my hands over her muzzle, muffling her sound. Was it a bear, I wondered? I realized I was holding my breath. I thought about the holes in the flimsy facade of the cabin, the spot beneath the bed where mice were getting in. I thought about the broken screen door and the wooden one behind that which needed to be replaced, almost falling off its rusty hinges. The entire cottage felt so frail and insecure all of a sudden, and I heard the loud noise of whatever that thing was, breathing heavily just outside, trying to get in. Maybe it was too cold out there even for it. The ground shook from the weight of the creature as it made its way around the cabin. I was so focused on it that I didn't notice the fire going out at first as it fizzled down to embers. I continued holding my breath until it was gone. Then I relit the fire, my shaking hands barely able to get it going again. Once it was burning hot, I didn't sleep anymore. I pulled Gibson close, and the two of us stayed up all night, watching the fire with wary eyes, taking occasional glances at the door. Even once we were both warm, we continued to shiver. When the sun came up, I didn't notice at first. It was dark in the cottage one minute, and then it was light. I blinked my eyes a few times and rolled out of bed, deciding I would waste no more time leaving. I was hoping the bear, or whatever had been outside the night before, was gone. Gibson was scratching at the front door, asking to be let outside to pee, which told me it was probably safe. In the light of the morning, all that had happened seemed to be a bad nightmare, and I told myself maybe it had been, till I got outside and saw the claw marks that marked the exterior wall. Shuddering, I threw my belongings in the truck, doused the fire with too much water, and took one last look at the place. What a weekend this had turned out to be, I thought to myself. With more people around, it would be easier to keep the fire going, taking turns feeding it with wood so that everyone could sleep through the night. But it was frightening being up here by myself, even with Gibson by my side. I'd never done it before in the winter, and I never would again. There were too many things that could go wrong. Freak snowstorm, a fallen tree blocking the road, getting stuck or going into a ditch, and those were just the beginning. I wanted to get out of here before any of those things happened. The truck didn't want to start at first. I turned the key in the ignition twice, hearing only the click of the absence of any engine noise. Cursing loudly, I checked to make sure I hadn't left the interior lights on or something which would drain the battery. Satisfied there was still a charge, I tried one more time, and finally the old shitbox let out a cough and kicked into life. The engine began to sputter before finally settling into a steady, rusted purr. "All right, Gibson, let's get out of here," I said, rubbing my dog's head and smiling as she blinked at me. She looked content in the front seat, happy to be back in the truck and out of the cold cottage. There was a thin layer of snow on the gravel road, and the tires moved easily enough. I looked up to see the sky was turning gray above us. A few snowflakes were just beginning to fall. The weather was making an early appearance. I turned on the radio, and sure enough, they said the same thing I was thinking. The storm would be arriving early. By noon, the highways would be a parking lot. Whiteout conditions. Be prepared to be trapped in your car. Have emergency services ready. My anxiety was through the roof as I went around a bend in the road. Hitting the gas, I came to the first big hill and went over it, seeing something strange up ahead as I came over the rise. Whatever it was blocking the road. Massive. Brown. The lumpy fur shape got bigger as I pulled up in front of it. The bear, which had been trying to get into my cottage the night before, was dead, lying in the middle of the gravel road and blocking it completely. First, I thought it had frozen to death. I got out of my truck and inspected it and was surprised to find there was a horrible smell coming from the carcass. It was a chemical smell, noxious and unpleasant, like some sort of factory waste. The snow had melted all around the beast, the blood and entrails pooling around the far side. What the hell could have done something like this? Aren't bears at the top of the food chain? Alpha predators? Gibson was by my side, but she didn't venture anywhere near the body. Usually she would have gotten curious, trying to sniff at it or something like that, but she stayed next to me, emitting a low growl. The road was completely blocked, I realized. There was no way out, not unless I could move it. No matter which way I attempted it, the giant body of the dead bear would not budge. It weighed a ton. There were large trees on either side of the road, so close to the driving path. There was only one way out, which was by driving across the frozen lake. And that was way risky. I hadn't been able to test the thickness of the ice yet. It would need to be nearly a foot deep for me to feel comfortable, but there was a clear way on and off the ice if it came down to it. I got back in the truck and threw it in reverse since there was nowhere to turn around. I felt sick to my stomach, nervous with anticipation and fear, uncertain of how things were going to play out. Once back in front of the cottage, I got out of the truck and went down to the ice with my spud. Walking out onto the lake, I cleared a spot with my boot and began to dig. I dug with the sharpened metal rod. Satisfied that I'd found the bottom of the ice, I put the tape measure through the hole, hoping it would be close to a foot. Looking at the tape measure, my heart sank. The ice was barely 7 inches thick, just below the minimum 8 inches where it would be safe to drive a vehicle across. My truck was on the heavy side, and I wouldn't feel comfortable unless it was a full foot thick. I pulled out my phone and checked for a signal, deciding it was time to call someone for help. Who would I call? I wasn't sure, but I knew I couldn't get out of this jam by myself. Of course, I muttered out loud, seeing the signal bars were down to 0, and the words "no service" were printed over the top of the screen. Surely I would have gotten another severe warning alert otherwise, because snow was now being dumped down on me from above, and the sky had turned nearly black with the approaching storm. I typed out a message in the group chat, telling them my situation, hitting send regardless of the lack of signal. I knew from experience that it would go through eventually. I just hoped it would be sooner rather than later. Gibson let out a loud, high-pitched whine, her tone rising in volume as she began to bark. High, persistent yips that were totally unlike her. She backed away, then let out a stream of urine, her hind legs trembling as she did. I looked up from my phone and saw what she had spotted. Across the lake, something was moving in the trees. I saw fingers wrapping around a tree trunk, too high up, the nails too long and too sharp to be a person. Whatever this giant was, it looked similar to a man, but it was massive. It peered out at me from beneath the boughs of the trees, its head probably 15 feet off the ground. Its skeletal limbs matched the monochromatic tone of the birches on either side of it, a gray, pale white shade. I couldn't distinguish the entire form of it in the shadows, but I could make out its eyes. They reflected back at me, catching the gray light coming through the clouds. And then I saw its mouth spread wider in a grin, teeth dripping blood, and it disappeared back into the darkness. The temperature felt like it had dropped to 30 below again, and I began to shiver involuntarily as I looked down to see Gibson doing the same. There was only one choice, only one place we could go. Back to the cabin. It was either that or risk plunging the truck into the frozen lake, attempting to drive across. We were on a small peninsula surrounded by water on all sides. Only one way in and one way out, and that way was blocked by the body of a giant brown bear. I took the dog back inside the cottage and locked the doors, taking uneasy glances outside through the cracks in the boarded-up windows. What the hell was that thing in the forest, I asked myself over and over again, but no answers came to mind. There were no creatures I could think of that were 15 feet tall, with reflective eyes that stood on two legs like a man, capable of disemboweling a full-grown brown bear, capable of causing the temperature to plunge all around me. There was only one creature capable of that, and it wasn't supposed to exist. It was something from myth, from folklore, from legends that weren't supposed to be real. "It's a Wendigo," I said out loud, immediately regretting the words, as if saying them made them true, as if saying them would summon it. Wendigos are supernatural creatures born of Canadian First Nation folklore. They live in cold, remote places and make people go mad merely through their presence. They thrive on hunger, despair, and loneliness of their victims, who usually live in remote communities. They drive families apart, instilling urges of cannibalism in people and making them want to consume their loved ones. During the lean, hard months of the winter, this usually happens. They turn people into raving cannibals, driving away all their loved ones, and then once they're alone, the Wendigo strikes. It either consumes you while you're still alive, tearing flesh from your bones while you beg and scream, or it turns you into one of its own kind. But the Wendigo's greatest curse is that no matter how much flesh it consumes, it only grows hungrier. With every ounce of meat it takes in, it grows taller and more emaciated. Its hunger grows more insatiable with its height, until it's a towering beast with its head amongst the treetops as it roams the forest, constantly searching for its next meal. Gibson whimpered and burrowed her face into my armpit as if hearing my inner thoughts. Trying to reassure her, I stroked her fur and told her it'd be okay, although I had a feeling it wouldn't. I tried to get the fire going again, but it was a fruitless effort. Everything inside the stove was damp and wet, and scolded myself for dousing the fire with so much water. Still, I kept at it, knowing we might be stuck here for a while. Pretty soon the wind was howling and blowing outside, and the snow was piling up in front of the door. I made a point of opening it every so often to clear the snow from the steps, knowing that I would need firewood, taking weary glances off into the forest across the lake as I did so. Finally, I got the fire started, a low guttering flame in the stove, which wanted to go out all the time. Everything was damp, but I kept feeding it fresh kindling, nursing it, until it was able to keep going by itself. Hours passed as we waited to either run out of firewood or be attacked by the creature. We were running low on kindling, and the sun was beginning to set. My stomach rumbled with hunger when I felt something strange. The ground suddenly shook beneath my feet, and I heard Gibson whining from beside me. "What is it, girl?" I asked, my voice catching in my throat as I realized the answer. It was the creature. It was back. The dining room table began to rattle and bounce up and down as whatever was outside got closer, and I imagined the creature lifting the roof off a cabin like a top on a dish in a fancy restaurant, picking me up and eating me whole like a wriggling shrimp. A second later, there was a sound at the front door, metal being ripped and sheared as I realized the creature was making its way in. The screen door landed on the ground with a crash, and then the wooden door was being torn from its hinges an instant later. Cold air rushed inside as Gibson began to let out shrill, panicked barks of terror. I heard the thing tearing apart the front entrance, easily ripping apart the wood and making the doorway larger so that it could come inside. I tipped over the dining room table to use as a barricade. I picked up a chair, the only weapon I could find nearby, thinking I could throw it at the thing's face to defend us, when I heard a strange noise from the front. It was a car horn honking. Someone had come to save me. I heard a loud ding and pulled out my phone and saw the green check mark beside my group chat, indicating that at some point it had gone through, at some brief moment when there'd been a gap in the clouds. Reading the new messages brought a hopeful smile across my face. "Matt, you just had to skip town a day early and go ice fishing, didn't you?" "What the hell is that thing?" Ted was yelling from outside. "I don't know, but it's trying to get inside. Jay, are you there?" I shouted back that I was. There was a loud screech from outside, which I realized had come from the monster. They'd actually wounded it somehow. I ran to the front door with Gibson and looked out, seeing the creature for the first time. It stood with its back to us, its head among the treetops, even taller than it appeared at first. My friends had caught it off guard, but now it was fully aware of them, and it was going after them. The Wendigo was distracted by something in front of the cottage, and I realized that one of my friends had gotten out of the car and they were using themselves as bait so that I could flee the cottage safely. They had driven across the ice with their lighter vehicle, just as I had hoped to do. I guessed that they'd run into trouble moving the body of the giant bear which blocked the road. "Jay!" Ted screamed out the window, driving the car in a circle on the ice, as if too terrified to stay still. I raced over to the car, slipping and sliding on the ice. It was Matt who was distracting the Wendigo, I realized, and I called for him to get away from the thing. It was too large, too fast. He didn't know what he was dealing with, but that was Matt. He was always act first and think later kind of guy. Not only that, but he often put himself in harm's way for his friends. He turned to look at me and gave a thumbs up, his attention diverted from the creature for a split second. As Gibson and I got into the car, we heard his scream. I looked up to see the Wendigo close the distance in an instant, and was picking him up like an insect, turning him over and beginning to bite him. As Matt screamed for help, the creature peeled off his skin, exposed his skull as it ate his face. The calls for help turned to bubbling gurgles and wet, choking sounds, and I nearly got out of the car to run after him, but Ted grabbed my wrist and pulled me back inside. "You can't save him," he said with wet-rimmed eyes, and eventually I relented. We raced our way across the icy lake, making a path through the blizzard, cutting a swath off the fresh fallen snow on our way back to mainland. For a while, we debated what to do. Should we call the police? Our friend had just died, after all, but we knew that if we did, we'd be considered suspects. And with no other reasonable explanation, they'd pin his death on us. They'd say we'd killed him. There were no boxes they could check on an official police report citing a Wendigo attack. So, since such things didn't exist, being myths and legends, we'd be their only suspect. As it turned out, we didn't have to worry about it, though. A message popped up from Matt on the group chat just a few minutes after we got home, and I had to tell myself that it wasn't all just a nightmare, a hallucination from the cold and lack of sleep and food. But Ted and Greg both told me I hadn't imagined it. What we saw was real, as much as I wish it wasn't. The three of us read the message on the group chat again and again. My heart was beating fast, and a sick knot was growing in my stomach, bile rising in my throat that I could taste inside my mouth. "Hey guys, you really missed out on a feast. Ice fishing is just as much fun in a blizzard, if not more so. Let's reschedule the trip for next week, okay? I'll be waiting for you here." As much as we didn't want to go, we've resolved that we have to. We can't leave Matt like that. We have to help him. Next week, we're making the trip back up there, even if it kills us. I do like that story. Sometimes the most horrific things are the things we can't always see. A sound, or maybe a bit of mystery. And an emergency call on your phone when you're out in the middle of nowhere is certainly something that can be a little bit spine-tingling. I myself, several times, have heard the emergency alerts come over the radio when I'm stuck inside the work I do at the jail, and I know that I can't help, I can't get out, and I'm certainly not going anywhere. Sometimes it's a backdrop for my own horror. But speaking of horror, let's move on to our next story. By M Thompson, we go from strange alerts and strange rooms to strange buses. So let's sit back, have a cup of hot cocoa, and learn a little more about the midnight bus. The first time I heard the warning, I was sitting in the back of my grandmother's cramped kitchen, where the air always smells faintly of rosemary and burnt toast. She was muttering over a steaming cup of tea, her gnarled hands trembling as she traced patterns in the air with her spoon. "The midnight bus," she whispered, her voice like the crackle of dead leaves. "Whatever you do, don't get on, no matter how cold it is, no matter how empty the street feels. You hear me, Clara?" I nodded back then, dismissing her warning as one of her strange superstitions. My grandmother had always been a little odd. She spoke of omens and bird songs, carried a pouch of salt wherever she went, and warned me about the strange places no one else seemed to see. I humored her at the time, never once believing I'd be stupid enough to ignore her advice. That was before last night. It was raining, an icy drizzle that seeped through my coat and into my hair. I'd stayed too late at work again, trying to finish up a proposal, and by the time I finally made it to the bus stop, the streets were deserted. My breath fogged in front of me as I checked my phone. The next bus wasn't due for another 30 minutes. That's when I saw it. Far down the street, headlights appeared, two faint yellow orbs cutting through the darkness. The bus was moving slowly, as if it were testing the air. It wasn't supposed to be there. I checked the timetable again, confused. This route didn't have a midnight service, but there it was, coming closer. The rain picked up and I shivered, staring at the approaching bus. It looked old, the paint peeling, the windows cloudy, as if frost had etched patterns into the glass. But the cold was biting now, and the thought of standing in it for another half hour was suddenly unbearable. The bus screeched to a stop in front of me, the doors hissing open. Warm air spilled out for a moment, and I hesitated. If you see the midnight bus, whatever you do... My grandmother's voice echoed in my mind, but the rain was relentless, and the shelter offered no real cover. I stepped forward, telling myself it was just a bus, a weird, unscheduled bus, but a bus, nothing more. The driver didn't look at me as I climbed on. He, or it, was shrouded in shadows, his face obscured by the brim of a hat. He didn't ask for my fare, didn't even glance my way. He just nodded at the seat, his skeletal hand resting on the wheel. I walked towards the back of the bus, shivering despite the warmth. That's when I noticed the passengers. They weren't normal. First glance, they looked like ordinary folks, commuters slumped in their seats, staring blankly ahead. But as the bus rushed forward, I realized something was wrong. The man closest to me had a neck that twisted at an unnatural angle, as though it had been broken. His head lolled to one side, his lifeless eyes fixed on the window. The The woman across the aisle held a bundle in her arms, humming softly. I thought it was a baby, till I saw the first glint of bone poking through the rags. I tried not to look at them, tried to focus on the rain-streaked windows, but the air was heavy, thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. As the bus moved on, time seemed to warp. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But then I noticed the rain outside had stopped. The cityscape blurred, the familiar streets replaced with unfamiliar ones. The buildings seemed older, their windows dark and empty. A fog rolled in, swallowing everything outside. Then there were the stops. Each time the bus halted, the doors would creak open, and something would get on. Sometimes it was a person, or what I thought was a person, dripping wet or covered in soot. Other times, it was a creature that slithered or crawled, its form indistinct in the dim light. No one spoke. The woman with the bundle rocked back and forth, her humming growing louder. The man with the broken neck twitched. The first time I tried to get off, the bus driver stopped me. I'd stood up, gripping the pole for balance as the bus slowed at another strange, fog-shrouded stop. The door opened, revealing an endless expanse of black water, stretching as far as I could see. A figure stood at the edge, its outline blurred. I stepped forward, ready to leave, but the bus driver's voice cut through the silence. "Not your stop." It was the first thing he'd said. His voice was low and guttural, as if it had been dragged through gravel. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. "What do you mean?" I stammered. He turned his head, just enough for me to glimpse his face, or what was left of it. Empty eye sockets stared back at me, his mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile. "Sit down," he rasped. By the time I managed to get off the bus, it was 3 days later. I didn't realize it at first. The sun was just starting to rise, casting the streets in golden light. It looked normal, too normal, like a picture-perfect version of my city. But when I checked my phone, I saw the date. 3 days had passed. My hands were trembling as I stumbled down the street, trying to make sense of what had happened. The image of the passengers, the driver, the strange stops, they all blurred together in my mind. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me, that I hadn't truly escaped. And then I heard it, the faint rumble of an engine, the screech of brakes. The midnight bus was coming back.
Looks like we've hit the halfway point on today's bunch of stories. But don't worry, we're not skimping out at the end. And I've got some great tales and some amazing scares to come. Coming to us from TheHomeStudioHorror, we have a story that I like a whole lot, and I really wish he'd done a few more of them in this vein. The setting and the characters and the mystery of it is all so enticing, and I think once you hear it, you'll think so too. So, let's hear a story about how we have to get dressed, and we have to leave right now.
The house was a small, 2-story affair, with white siding on the bottom floor and gray shingles on the top. 3 windows were facing the street, a large picture window, a small rectangular one above that, and another large window below it. I got out of my car and walked towards the door. knocking twice before it opened. A woman stood there, wearing a blue dress with her hair tied back in a bun. She had bright green eyes that seemed to sparkle when she saw me standing outside her house. "Hello," she said cheerfully. Her voice was soft, but carried well through the night air. "Hi, are you Miss Tanner?" She nodded. "Yes, I am." She smiled again and stepped aside so I could enter the house. It smelled odd inside. Not bad or anything like that, just strange, like old books and dust. "Please come in." I entered her living room. It wasn't much more than a couch and a coffee table, an end table with a lamp on it. That's all I really needed for a place to sleep. The walls were painted yellow, which looked nice against the dark furniture. The carpet was black and covered most of the hardwood floors. There was a small kitchen off to the side of the living room with a sink, a stove, and a fridge. Everything was clean and tidy. "Sorry for the mess," she said, while pointing to some boxes stacked in the corner. "My husband died last year, and I just haven't had the time to get around to moving everything yet." "No problem. I don't mind sleeping in a bit of mess." She chuckled. "Well, if you want to put your things away, feel free. Just make sure not to take too long, since I have to leave in a few hours." "Okay, thank you." "You're welcome. I'll be right back." She disappeared down a hallway. As I looked around the room, I noticed something else odd about the house. The walls weren't straight. They bulged outward here and there like they'd been pushed from the inside out by someone, pushing their way through them. It was subtle enough that it didn't bother me at first, but as I looked closer, I realized that it wasn't just the walls. Every single surface in the entire house had these little imperfections, including the ceiling and the floor. I heard footsteps coming down the hall and turned to see Miss Tanner returning with 2 glasses filled with water. She handed me one and took a seat on the couch across from me. "So, what brings you out this way?" she asked as she sipped her drink. "I'm looking for a friend of mine. He went missing in the area about a month ago." "Oh, that's dreadful. What happened?" "He just vanished." I paused as I thought about how to explain. "He was staying in an abandoned hotel nearby and never came back. We think he might have gotten lost in the woods." She shook her head sadly. "That's awful. Is there any chance he survived? Maybe ran away somewhere?" "I don't know. I hope so." She sighed heavily and leaned back on the couch. "I'm sorry. I wish I could help you find him." We sat quietly for a few moments before she spoke up again. "I don't mean to pry, but are you sure he isn't still alive? Maybe he's hiding somewhere or something." "Well, maybe," I said hesitantly. "Do you have any idea where he might have gone?" "I'm not sure, but I have a hunch." She laughed softly and shook her head. "Well, let me know if you hear anything about him. I'll keep my ears open as well." "Thanks. I better get some sleep now," I said, standing up from the couch. "Of course. I'll show you to your room." I downed the glass of water and placed it on the table. Even that seemed crooked. "Thanks again for letting me stay here." "You're more than welcome. Please feel free to use anything in the kitchen if you need anything." "I will." I followed her down the hallway to a staircase leading to the second floor. At the top of those stairs was another hallway that led to 3 doors. One on each side and one at the end. She pointed to the door on the left. "That one's yours. No one else is staying this weekend, so other doors will be locked." She opened the door to my room and flicked a light switch. There was a dresser opposite the bed with a window above it, and a small bed with a nightstand next to it. The wall behind the bed was covered in posters of famous horror movies, slasher flicks mostly. "This should be all set up for you." She motioned towards the bed. "Make yourself comfortable. My room is on the 3rd floor if you need anything." "Thank you. I'll keep that in mind." She walked over to the door at the end of the hall and closed it behind her before disappearing into her own room. I took a look around my room before lying down on the bed. The sheets were clean and smelled nice, but I couldn't tell whether they'd been washed recently or not. As I got under them, I noticed something strange about them. They felt heavy, like they were weighted down on one side. When I tried to lift them up, they wouldn't budge. I rolled over on my back and pulled at them, but still no give. Something was definitely wrong with this place. I lay there staring at the ceiling for a while before drifting off into a deep but restless sleep. I woke up sometime later to a knocking on the other side of my door. I sat up and rubbed my eyes before standing up from the bed. "Who is it?" I called out, walking over the door. There was no answer. I unlocked the door and cracked it open. It was dark outside, but the moon was bright enough that I could see everything clearly. I stepped out into the hallway and saw nothing except darkness. "Hello?" I called again, but once again there was no response. "Is someone there?" I asked as I turned around slowly. I heard another knock from behind me, and spun around only to catch sight of Miss Tanner standing in the doorway to her room. Her hair had fallen loose from her bun and hung down past her shoulders. She was wearing a white tank top and blue pajama pants with red stripes down them. She looked like she was trying to hide herself by covering her face with her hands, which were pressed against her cheeks. "Miss Tanner?" She didn't say anything, continuing to stare at me with wide eyes. "Are you okay?" I asked as I approached her. She nodded, but kept her head down. What's happened?" I asked as I reached out to touch her shoulder. She flinched away from my hand and backed up until she hit the wall behind her. Then, without saying a word, she ran down the hallway and disappeared into the shadows. I stood there for several seconds, dumbfounded by what had happened. What the hell had I just witnessed? Was it real? Or was it just one of those dreams or hallucinations brought on by stress or exhaustion? I went back inside my room and locked the door behind me. I grabbed my phone from my pocket and checked the time. It was after midnight. I'd been asleep for hours. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the poster of Friday the 13th hanging on the wall above the desk. Why would Miss Tanner act like that? And why would she try to hide from me when I touched her? It made no sense. I sighed heavily and laid back down on the bed. I wanted to go back to sleep, but I knew I couldn't fall asleep now. Not until I figured out what was going on here. Maybe if I waited long enough, she'd come back out and explain herself. I must have fallen asleep eventually, because suddenly I was shaken awake by someone pounding on the door. "Wake up!" I jumped up from the bed and opened the door to find Miss Tanner standing in front of me, with her hands balled into fists at her side. "What's wrong?" "Get dressed. You have to leave right now," she said frantically as she began to pace back and forth. "Why?" "You don't know how dangerous this place is. Get your things and get out, now." "What are you talking about?" She stopped pacing and looked me dead in the eye. "The house is cursed." "What?" "It's haunted. There are spirits in this house." I laughed nervously and shook my head. "There aren't any ghosts here." "Then what do you call that thing you saw earlier tonight?" "I don't know what you're talking about," I lied. Was she talking about herself? "I'm not leaving until I get some answers." "Please, just go. If you stay here much longer, something bad will happen to you, just like your friend." "My friend?" "Just go," she yelled. She started running downstairs. "Wait," I shouted after her, but it was too late. She was already halfway up the steps before she turned around and glared at me. "Tell me what happened." "He died," she said simply. "How?" "They got him." "Who?" "The monsters." I blinked at her and tried to process what she was telling me. "Monsters?" "Yes, the monsters. They came through the walls and they took him away." "Are you insane?" I screamed at her. "There's no such thing as ghosts or monsters." She frowned at me and shook her head. "There are more things than just that." Then she pointed to the floor below us. "You need to leave right now before they come for you next." "I can't leave. My friend might be here somewhere. He could still be alive." She let out a frustrated sigh and walked over to the window. She pushed aside the curtains and looked outside. The moon was bright enough that I could see everything clearly. I followed her gaze out the window and saw nothing except for darkness. She pulled open the window and leaned out into the night air. "He's leaving," she called out into the darkness. I heard a low growl coming from what sounded like inside the walls. Miss Tanner slowly backed away from the window. Then, without warning, she fell backwards onto the ground. Her body hit the floor with a sickening crunch and didn't move again. I stood there, staring at Miss Tanner's broken form lying on the floor for several seconds, before turning around and sprinting down the stairs. The whole house began to creak and moan, and it appeared as if the walls were closing in on me. I ran past the kitchen and the living room, both of which appeared to be untouched, and headed towards the front door. The only light came from the moon shining through the windows of the hallway. As I approached the exit, I felt something grab hold of my shoulder and pull me back. I spun around quickly to see a figure standing in the shadows behind me. It was tall and thin, with oily skin and long black hair. Its face was covered by a mask made of human bones. I struggled against its grip, but couldn't break free. The walls looked as if they were melting, and more human bone-masked faces were emerging from all around me, surrounding me on all sides and closing in on me until I couldn't breathe. I reached out to touch one of them, but only grabbed hold of empty air. Then suddenly, I was dragged back through the walls, felt myself descending into that pitch-black abyss beneath me. I woke up gasping for breath and sat right up in bed. My heart was racing and my body was soaked with sweat. There was a loud bang on the door and I jumped out of bed. I unlocked the door and opened it slightly, just enough to see who was knocking. But when I did, I wasn't surprised to see Mrs. Tanner standing there, with her hands balled into fists at her side. "Get dressed. You have to leave right now."
Coming down to the last story, and it's a subject that I can tell you're all very fond of. We're going to hear about someone's grandpa, though not the grandpa we're used to hearing about. This fellow's grandpa has already passed, but he's left behind a little something special. That's right. Today, we're going to learn a little more about Grandpa's ashes.
Little is known about my grandpa, which is strange, but it's not like he's ever been a person of interest. All that we knew was that he was in the Army. After that, he suffered from PTSD and died under mysterious conditions. The end. It was December 2017. Nathan and I were home decorating for Christmas. Mom was out on a shopping spree. We were jerking around when Des showed up, a longtime friend of mine. With the three of us in the house, something was bound to happen. Nathan decided to go call his girlfriend, Anne. They'd been going out a couple of days now. "Dude, who's this?" Des pointed to the urn that was situated under the tree. "That's Grandpa. You can touch him. I know you're into freaky stuff." But it was already too late. His hands were all over the thing. Des had already opened the urn. Looks like drugs. What do you think would happen if I snorted some of it? Think you'll get high or just dead? He took a handful out of the urn. I inched closer to try and take it away from him. "Dude, come on. I don't think you'd get high." "Probably not." He raised an eyebrow and smirked. I knew that look. We'd been friends for over a decade, and I could tell when he had a messed up idea. He was an idiot. Maybe so was I. That's when we got along. Plan was simple. Get Nathan to snort the grandpa ashes and get first-hand experience of what would happen. Chances are, nothing would happen. I got the camera ready while Des planted some ash residue on the top lip and nostril to act like he'd already snorted some. With the ash residue on his nose, it was go time. Knowing my little brother, he'd be too innocent and too easy to fool. "What are you guys up to?" he asked, when he saw Des wiping his nose and howling. "Whew! Now that you're done taking care of business, my boy, how about some of this?" Des grabbed him by the neck, leading him to the table where lines of something were spread out. "I don't know, man. I don't think he can handle it," I said, looking at Nathan as I gaslighted him to get a reaction. See, the thing is, if he'd known me better, he would have seen right through me. I don't even let him smoke weed with us. Why would I let him have any of whatever this was? I saw him bite down. I can, beating his chest, trying to boost his bravado. He lowered his head, taking a deep breath and snorting the whole line. Des and I both burst out laughing. Nathan was confused for a while. Then he went stiff, his body starting to convulse. He fell to the ground, rolling and blinking rapidly. What's happening? What's going on? Des shoved me to the side and tried to steady him. Get some water, he told me. I came back with a glass of water and he downed it. What the hell, bro? He looked at me. What? I was thirsty. Then he proceeded to slap Nathan. Wake up! Wake up! Nathan continued to jerk his body. Then he went limp. There was a deafening silence in the room. Beads of sweat dribbled down my face. I splashed him with water and he woke up. What'd you guys do? He yelled at us. We told him what had happened. We couldn't keep a straight face. We laughed about it. Then Nathan started wearing more than one jacket. He claimed he was cold. We shrugged it off. He'd come and snuggle with Mom during movies. Mom's warm, he said, and eventually fell asleep. It was weird. The dude was 17. Still, I was getting an uneasy feeling that I kept shutting off. At times, he'd complain about how his girl, Anne, was not giving him much warmth. I assumed he was talking about sex or something and getting his blood going. How little I knew. Nathan stopped going out, and Anne stopped calling. He had quieted down about being cold. Around midnight, I'd catch him in front of Mom's room, snuggling something like a blanket. Every time I'd knock on his door, he'd come rushing out. Everything okay, bud? What's up with Anne? Y'all break up? He'd just act like everything was okay. Then one day, while we were watching a movie, Des leaned over and told me, Dude, I heard from Cass's boyfriend Diego, who went with Brian to the theater, about how Matt's cousin, you know, his brother's a little slow. He heard Kelly say, Anne's missing. I don't know, dude. It's kind of weird. That was news to me. Nathan told me that everything was fine, and he had just spoken to Anne. I think he's lying. We need to check out his room. Des looked at me like I was high. He sized me up from head to toe. I mean, I was high, but he was making it a little obvious. I'm not about to go in your brother's room and check out his weird collection of who knows what. Hey, what are you doing? Let go. Nathan had fallen asleep, snuggled up with our mom on the couch like he did sometimes, and I wasn't about to waste the opportunity. A strong stench wafted from Nathan's room as we approached. We had to cover our noses. That's nasty, man. Does he crap the bed or something? Ugh. I turned around, looking for something out of place. Des had pulled his blanket and found the source of the smell. There was what appeared to be skin, neatly laid there. Parts of it were jagged. It was signs that whoever had skinned the person was an amateur. What are you guys doing? We both spun around and found Nathan standing there, eyes hollow and devoid of emotions or recognition. He tilted his head to the side. Oh, I see you found Anne's blanket. She was saying I was getting under her skin, so I got under her skin all right. See, Tate, I've been feeling chilly for a while now, but Mom's home, and Anne's skin helps me sleep better at night. There's 2 more fabrics to that skin blanket, though. He took a few strides towards us, snuggling the thing, bloodshot eyes watching us. You killed Anne and took her skin? What, are you sick? The whole scene made my head hurt, realization dawning on me. He was possessed. He had to be. You messed up, man. Like, really messed up. Des pulled the skin by the corner. There were bloodstains and bruises. The thing was flappy. He scrunched his nose. He's capable of that. What else is he capable of? He killed Anne and skinned her. That's just sick, man. Nathan giggled. Nuh-uh. Anne's alive. I love her. So I didn't kill her. She killed herself to keep me warm. After the whole ordeal with the powder, I was feeling cold, you know? My heart sank, blame crashing into me. We did this. We did. We need to fix it. We need to fix you. I moved closer, each step heavier than the last, heart hammering in my chest. My breath was strained, and I went in for a hug. We? Des asked, while trying to get the cogs in his head working. What you mean, we? No, brah. I watched Nathan get in bed and pull Anne's skin over his body as he let out a deep sigh. Close the door on your way out, he said, pulling it tightly around his body, almost snuggling it. He was smiling. Look, you might be wondering why we were so calm about all this. Some of it was the weed, but some of it was us realizing we couldn't tell anybody, 'cause we had done this. Dez's place was the best place to think without Nathan eavesdropping. We didn't want to make him suspect us. When our heads were cleared, we yelled and kicked things and cussed at our stupidity. So your grandpa possessed your brother, and now he's doing his bidding. Your brother's a crybaby. This can't be him. Dez was going up and down, biting his nails. And dead people are cold, meaning that's why he's feeling cold, and he only finds warmth in those he loves, like your mom. I fumbled for my phone and dialed her number. It went to voicemail. I tried it, and it went straight to voicemail again. Des told me to put my phone on record because he had a weird feeling. We needed to do something, but without a solid plan, things could get out of hand. That's how we did things, though. Act now and think later. Des was quick to Google some exorcist stuff and phrases. We got holy water, salt, and crosses, and we ran like hell back to my place. The lights were off, which was strange. We tried our best to sneak in and turn the lights on. Nathan was sitting on the couch, his skin blanket wrapped around him. The whole room reeked of decay, but he seemed to be asleep. Slowly as possible, we made our way towards him. Just as we came to within arm's reach, he woke up. His eyes were blood red, and he went feral. He jumped up, gnashing his teeth and fingernails in my face. He was clawing with that thing dangling off his shoulder like a cape. Des yanked him by the skin blanket, trying to get him off of me. Oh my God, it's so slippery. It stinks. Nathan turned around and headbutted him, and he fell with his nose bleeding. I splashed him with the holy water, and he shrieked, retreating to the corner. His voice went deep. Son, don't. It's Grandpa Max. I'm so cold. I splashed him some more, and he whimpered, demurring as his demeanor changed. Tate, what's happening? What are you doing? It was my brother's voice, his eyes pleading. Please, help me. I'm so cold. Everything around me became muffled. I looked at what I was doing, then back to the person before me. I'm sorry. Des pushed me to the side and threw salt on him, yelling, Exi ergo transgressor, exi ergo transgressor, exi subtutor plene omne dolo et fabulace. Vertitus immiscique innocentium persuator. Nathan growled through gritted teeth as Des went on speaking that faux Latin. A cacophony of words rained down on us. His eyes rolled to the back of his head. Lights began to flicker. He grunted like a feral animal as drool dribbled down his chin. Ni vecigu la lordum de la absimo. Nathan's body twisted and jerked. He cocked his head to the side and ground his teeth. We kept throwing salt and holy water on him. Des reciting his phrases. There was yelling back and forth in a deep, rumbling voice as Des went on. Then everything went silent. Nathan fell to the ground, limp. Is it over? Is it done? I didn't respond, but I dashed to my brother's side. I hugged him tight, and as I held him, he seemed to come back to himself some. What happened? Why am I wet and on the floor? When we told him about what had happened, he sobbed and threw away the skin blanket. His eyes looked droopy, the bags under them showing that he hadn't been sleeping much. A week later, Anne's case was closed. I went to a public phone to give the police an anonymous tip, and that was the last we heard of it. When my phone rang, I looked down and saw it was Des. "Sup?" I asked. He took a deep breath. "This feels way too easy, don't you think? I mean, how it all went down." He waited for my response, and when he got none, he continued. "See, right now, I'm in Nathan's room. Remember when we asked what happened, and he said he didn't recall anything? But then I asked if he knew any Latin prior to speaking it. You know, that stuff he was yelling back at us. He said it wasn't Latin. It was Spanish." I rolled my eyes. "What are you getting at?" Cogs in my brain starting to grind and sink. Des paused, but continued with a deep sigh. "That's the thing. My incantation was in Latin. He was responding in Spanish, meaning he remembers. I know he says he doesn't remember, but what if he's lying? What if he was never possessed? What if..." The line went dead after that, the beating of my heart echoing through my eardrums. My hands were slippery with sweat. I had trouble dialing his number. I tried calling Des back, but his phone never went through. I received 3 documents on my phone from him, and that was the end of it.
And just like that, our time together is at an end. I know, it's always bittersweet when we must say goodbye. However, I'll be back again very soon with more great stories and more great times spent with my friends and those who may become my friends here on Cozy Horror. Till then, this is Dr. Plague wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.